The making of an Arab empire. It did not take long for the immense transformations occurring in Arabia to have an impact beyond the peninsula. In the centuries that followed, the energies born of those vast changes profoundly transformed much of the Afro-Eurasian world. The new Arab state became a huge empire, encompassing all or part of Egyptian, Roman Byzantine, Persian, Mesopotamian, and Indian civilizations. The Islamic faith spread widely within and outside that empire. So too did the culture and language of Arabia, as many Arabs migrated far beyond their original homeland, and many others found it advantageous to learn Arabic. From the mixing and blending of these many peoples emerged the new and distinctive third-wave civilization of Islam, bound by the ties of a common faith, but divided by differences of culture, class, politics, gender, and religious understanding. These enormously consequential processes, the making of a new religion, a new empire, and a new civilization, were central to world history during the Third Wave millennium. War, conquest, and tolerance. Within a few years of Muhammad's death in 632, Arab armies engaged the Byzantine and Persian Sassanid empires, the great powers of the region. It was the beginning of a process that rapidly gave rise to an Arab empire that stretched from Spain to India, penetrating both Europe and China, and governing most of the lands between them. In creating that empire, Arabs were continuing a long pattern of tribal raids into surrounding civilizations, but now these Arabs were newly organized in a state of their own, with a central command able to mobilize the military potential of the entire population. The Byzantine and Persian empires had for a century or more suffered periodic epidemics of the plague that decimated their urban populations, while the more remote and scattered Arabs of the Arabian desert were more protected from this pestilence. Furthermore, these great empires, weakened by decades of war with each other and by internal revolts, continued to view the Arabs as a mere nuisance rather than a serious threat. But by 644, the Sassanid Empire had been defeated by Arab forces, while Byzantium, the remaining eastern regions of the old Roman Empire, soon lost the southern half of its territories. Beyond these victories, Muslim forces operating on both land and sea swept westward across North Africa, conquered Spain in the early 700s, and attacked southern France. To the east, Arab armies reached the Indus River and seized some of the major oasis towns of Central Asia. In 751, they inflicted a crushing defeat on Chinese forces in the Battle of Talas River, which had lasting consequences for the cultural evolution of Asia, for it checked the further expansion of China to the west and made possible the conversion to Islam of Central Asia's Turkic-speaking people. Most of the violence of conquest involved imperial armies, though on occasion civilians too were caught up in the fighting and suffered terribly. In 634, for example, a battle between Byzantine and Arab forces in Palestine resulted in the death of some 4,000 villagers. The motives driving the creation of the Arab Empire were broadly similar to those of other empires. The merchant leaders of the new Islamic community wanted to capture profitable trade routes and wealthy agricultural regions. Individual Arabs found in military expansion a route to wealth and social promotion. The need to harness the immense energies of the Arabian transformation was also important. The fragile unity of the Ummah threatened to come apart after Muhammad's death, and external expansion provided a common task for the community. While many among the new conquerors viewed the mission of empire in terms of jihad, bringing righteous government to the peoples they conquered, this did not mean imposing a new religion. In fact, for the better part of a century after Muhammad's death, his followers usually referred to themselves as believers, a term that appears in the Quran far more than Muslims, and one that included pious Jews and Christians as well as the newly monotheistic Arabs. Such a posture eased the acceptance of the new political order, for many people recently incorporated in the emerging Arab Empire were already monotheists and familiar with the core ideas and practices of the believers' movement: prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, revelation, and prophets. Furthermore, the new rulers were remarkably tolerant of established Jewish and Christian faiths. The first governor of Arab-ruled Jerusalem was a Jew. Many old Christian churches continued to operate and new ones were constructed. A Nestorian Christian patriarch in Iraq wrote to one of his bishops around 647 CE, observing that the new rulers not only do not fight Christianity, they even commend our religion, show honor to the priests and monasteries and saints of the Lord, and make gifts to the monasteries and churches. Formal agreements or treaties recognize Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians as people of the book, giving them the status of dhimmis, protected but second-class subjects. Such people were permitted to freely practice their own religion, so long as they paid a special tax known as the jizya. Theoretically, the tax was a substitute for military service, supposedly forbidden to non-Muslims. In practice, many of them served in the highest offices within Muslim kingdoms and in their armies as well. In other ways too, the Arab rulers of an expanding empire sought to limit the disruptive impact of conquest. To prevent indiscriminate destruction and exploitation of conquered peoples, occupying Arab armies were restricted to garrison towns, segregated from the native population. Local elites and bureaucratic structures were incorporated into the new Arab empire. Nonetheless, the empire worked many changes on its subjects, the most enduring of which was the mass conversion of Middle Eastern peoples to what became by the 8th century the new and separate religion of Islam. Conversion. For some people, no doubt, converting to Islam was or subsequently became a matter of profound spiritual or psychological transformation, but far more often, at least initially, it was social conversion, motivated more by convenience than conviction. It happened at various rates and in different ways, but in the 4 centuries or so after the death of Muhammad, millions of individuals and many whole societies within the Arab Empire found their cultural identity bound up with a belief in Allah and the message of his prophet. They had become Muslims. How had this immense cultural change occurred? In some ways, perhaps, the change was not so dramatic, as major elements of Islam, monotheism, ritual prayer and cleansing ceremonies, fasting, divine revelation, the ideas of heaven, hell, and final judgment were quite familiar to Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians. Furthermore, Islam was from the beginning associated with the sponsorship of a powerful state, quite unlike the experience of early Buddhism or Christianity. Conquest called into question the power of old gods, while the growing prestige of the Arab Empire attracted many to Allah. Although deliberately forced conversion was rare and forbidden, living in an Islamic-governed state provided a variety of incentives for claiming Muslim identity. Slaves and prisoners of war were among the early converts, particularly in Persia. Converts could also avoid the jizya, the tax imposed on non-Muslims. People aspiring to official positions found conversion to Islam an aid to social mobility. In Islam, merchants found a religion friendly to commerce. The Prophet himself had been a trader, acting as a commercial agent for his wife Khadija. As Islamic law developed over several centuries, it defined what merchants might expect from one another and so reduced the uncertainty of long-distance commerce. And in the expansive Arab Empire, merchants enjoyed a huge and secure arena for trade. Conversion was not an automatic or easy process. Vigorous resistance delayed conversion for centuries among the Berbers of North Africa. A small group of zealous Spanish Christians in the mid-9th century provoked their own martyrdom by publicly insulting the Prophet, and some Persian Zoroastrians fled to avoid Muslim rule. More generally, though, a remarkable and lasting religious transformation occurred throughout the Arab Empire. In Persia, for example, between 750 and 900, about 80% of the population made the transition to a Muslim religious identity. But they did so in a manner quite distinct from the people of Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. In these regions, converts to Islam gradually abandoned their native languages, adopted Arabic, and came to see themselves as Arabs. In Iran or Persia, by contrast, Arab conquest did not involve cultural Arabization, despite some initial efforts to impose the Arabic language. By the 10th century, the vast majority of Persians had become Muslims, but the Persian language, called Farsi in Iran, flourished, enriched now by a number of Arabic loanwords and written in an Arabic script. In 1010, that language received its classic literary expression when the Persian poet Ferdowsi completed his epic work, the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. A huge text of some 60,000 rhyming couplets, it recorded the mythical and pre-Islamic history of Iran and gave an enduring expression to a distinctly Persian cultural identity. Thus, in places where large-scale Arab migration had occurred, such as Egypt, North Africa, and Iraq, Arabic culture and language, as well as the religion of Islam, took hold. Such areas are today both Muslim and Arab, while the peoples of Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia, and West Africa, for example, have Islamized without Arabizing. The preservation of Persian language and culture had enormous implications for the world of Islam. Many religious ideas of Persian Zoroastrianism, an evil satanic power, final judgment, heaven and hell, paradise, found their way into Islam. often indirectly via Jewish or Christian precedents. In Iran, Central Asia, India, and later in the Ottoman Empire, Islam was accompanied by pervasive Persian influences. Persian administrative and bureaucratic techniques, Persian court practices with their palaces, gardens, and splendid garments, Persian architecture, poetry, music, and painting, all of this decisively shaped the high culture of these Eastern Islamic lands. One of the Abbasid caliphs, himself an Arab, observed, "The Persians ruled for 1,000 years and did not need us Arabs even for a day. We have been ruling them for 1 or 2 centuries and cannot do without them for an hour." Divisions and controversies. The ideal of a unified Muslim community, so important to Muhammad, proved difficult to realize as conquest and conversion vastly enlarged the Islamic Ummah. A central problem involved leadership and authority in the absence of Muhammad's towering presence. Who should hold the role of caliph, the successor to Muhammad as the political leader of the Ummah, the protector and defender of the faith? That issue crystallized a variety of emerging conflicts within the Islamic world, between early and later converts, among various Arab tribes and factions, between Arabs and non-Arabs, between privileged and wealthy rulers and their far less fortunate subjects. Many of these political and social conflicts found expression in religious terms as various misunderstandings of the Quran and Muhammad's life and teachings took shape within the growing Islamic community. The first 4 caliphs, known among most Muslims as the rightly guided caliphs, were close companions of the Prophet, selected by the Muslim elders of Medina. Divisions surfaced almost immediately as a series of Arab tribal rebellions and new prophets persuaded the first caliph, Abu Bakr, to express them forcibly. The third and fourth caliphs, Uthman and Ali, were both assassinated, and by 656, less than 25 years after Muhammad's death, civil war pitted Muslim against Muslim. Out of that conflict emerged one of the deepest and most enduring rifts within the Islamic world. On one side were the Sunni Muslims, who held that the caliphs were rightful political and military leaders, selected by the Islamic community. On the other side of this sharp divide was the Shia, an Arabic word meaning party or faction, branch of Islam. Its adherents felt strongly that leadership in the Islamic world should derive from the line of Ali and his son Hussein, blood relatives of Muhammad, both of whom died at the hands of their political or religious enemies. If the caliph was the idealized communal leader for the Sunnis, imams served this purpose for most of the Shia Muslims. They were widely thought to have some special charisma based on descent from the Prophet, giving them a religious authority that the caliphs lacked and allowing them to infallibly interpret divine revelation and law. Thus, what began as a purely political conflict acquired over time a deeper significance. For much of early Islamic history, Shia Muslims saw themselves as the minority opposition within Islam. They felt that history had taken a wrong turn and that they were the defenders of the oppressed, the critics and opponents of privilege and power, while the Sunnis were the advocates of the established order. Various armed revolts by Shias over the centuries, most of which failed, led to a distinctive conception of martyrdom and to the expectation that their defeated leaders were merely in hiding and not really dead, and that they would return in the fullness of time. Thus, a messianic element entered Shia Islam. The Sunni-Shia schism became a lasting division in the Islamic world, reflected in conflicts among various Islamic states, and was exacerbated by further splits among the Shia. Those divisions echo still in the 21st century. As the Arab Empire grew, its caliphs were transformed from modest Arab chiefs into absolute monarchs, the shadow of God on earth, of the Byzantine or Persian variety, complete with elaborate court rituals, a complex bureaucracy, a standing army, and centralized systems of taxation and coinage. They were also subject to the dynastic rivalries and succession disputes common to other empires. The first dynasty, following the era of the rightly guided caliphs, came from the Umayyad family. Under its leadership, the Arab Empire expanded greatly. Caliphs became hereditary rulers, and the capital moved from Medina to the cosmopolitan Roman Byzantine city of Damascus in Syria. Its ruling class was an Arab military aristocracy drawn from various tribes. But Umayyad rule provoked growing criticism and unrest. The Shia viewed the Umayyad caliphs as illegitimate usurpers, and non-Arab Muslims resented their second-class citizenship in the empire. Many Arabs protested the luxurious living and impiety of their rulers. The Umayyads, they charged, made God's servants slaves, God's property something to be taken by turns among the rich, and God's religion a cause of corruption. Such grievances lay behind the overthrow of the Umayyads in 750 and their replacement by a new Arab dynasty, the Abbasids. With a splendid new capital in Baghdad, the Abbasid caliphs presided over a flourishing and prosperous Islamic civilization in which non-Arabs, especially Persians, now played a prominent role. But the political unity of the Abbasid Empire did not last long. Beginning in the mid-9th century, many local governors or military commanders effectively asserted the autonomy of their regions while still giving formal allegiance to the caliph in Baghdad. Long before Mongol conquest put an official end to the Abbasid Empire in 1258, the Islamic world had fractured politically into a series of sultanates, many ruled by Persian or Turkish military dynasties. A further tension within the world of Islam, though, one that seldom produced violent conflict, lay in different answers to one central question. What does it mean to be a Muslim, to submit wholly to Allah? That question took on added urgency as the expanding Arab Empire incorporated various peoples and cultures that had been unknown during Muhammad's lifetime. One answer lay in the development of the Sharia, the body of Islamic law developed primarily in the 8th and 9th centuries by religious scholars, Sunni and Shia alike, known as the ulama. Based on the Quran, the life and teachings of Muhammad, deductive reasoning, and the consensus of scholars, the emerging Sharia addressed in great detail practically every aspect of life. It was a blueprint for an authentic Islamic society, providing meticulous guidance for prayer and ritual cleansing. Marriage, divorce, and inheritance, business and commercial relationships, the treatment of slaves, political life, personal hygiene, dietary requirements, and much more. Debates among the ulama led to the creation of 4 schools of law among Sunni Muslims, and still others in the land of Shia Islam. To the ulama and their followers, living as a Muslim meant following the Sharia, and thus participating in the creation of an Islamic society. A second and quite different understanding of the faith emerged among those who saw the worldly success of Islamic civilization as a distraction and deviation from the purer spirituality of Muhammad's time. Known as the Sufis, they represented Islam's mystical dimension, and that they sought a direct and personal experience of the divine. Through renunciation of the material world, meditation on the words of the Quran, the chanting of the names of God, the use of music and dance, and the veneration of Muhammad and various saints, Sufis pursued an interior life, seeking to tame the ego and achieve spiritual union with Allah. To describe that inexpressible experience, they often resorted to metaphors of drunkenness or the embrace of lovers. Stain your prayer rug with wine, urged the famous Sufi poet Hafiz, referring to the intoxication of the believer with the divine presence. This mythical tendency in Islamic practice, which became widely popular by the 9th and 10th centuries, was at times sharply critical of the more scholarly and legalistic practitioners of the Sharia. To Sufis, establishment teachings about the law and correct behavior, while useful for daily living, did little to bring the believer into the presence of God. For some, even the Quran had its limits. Why spend time reading a love letter, the Quran, asked one Sufi master, when one might be in the very presence of the beloved who wrote it? Furthermore, Sufis felt that many of the ulama had been compromised by their association with worldly and corrupt governments. Sufis therefore often charted their own course to God, implicitly challenging the religious authority of the ulama. For these orthodox religious scholars, Sufi ideas and practice sometimes verged on heresy, as Sufis on occasion claimed unity with God and received new revelations or incorporated novel religious practices from outside the Islamic world. Despite their differences, adherents of the legalistic emphasis of the Sharia and practitioners of Sufi spirituality coexisted, mostly peacefully, mixing and mingling, collaborating and disagreeing in various combinations. For many centuries, roughly 1100 to 1800, Sufism was central to mainstream Islam, and many, perhaps most Muslims affiliated with one or another Sufi organization, making use of its spiritual practices. A major Islamic thinker, Al-Ghazali, himself both a legal scholar and a Sufi practitioner, in fact worked out an intellectual accommodation among these different strands of Islamic thought. Rational philosophy alone could never enable believers to know Allah, he argued. Nor were revelation and the law sufficient, for Muslims must know God in their hearts, through direct personal encounter with Allah. Nonetheless, differences in emphasis remained an element of tension and sometimes discord within the world of Islam. Women and men in early Islam. What did the rise of Islam and the making of the Arab Empire mean for the daily lives of women and their relationship with men? Virtually every aspect of this question has been and remains highly controversial. The debates began with the Quran itself. Did its teachings release women from earlier restrictions, or did they impose new limitations? At the level of spiritual life, the Quran was quite clear and explicit. Men and women were equal. Numerous passages in the Quran use gender-inclusive language, referring to believers, both men and women. Those who surrender themselves to Allah and accept the true faith, who are devout, sincere, patient, humble, charitable, and chaste, who fast and are ever mindful of Allah, on these, both men and women, Allah will bestow forgiveness and rich reward. But in social terms, and especially within marriage, the Quran, like the written text of almost all civilizations, viewed women as inferior and subordinate. Men have authority over women because Allah has made the one superior to the other, and because they spend their wealth to maintain them. Good women are obedient. More specifically, the Quran provided a mix of rights, restrictions, and protections for women. Female infanticide, for example, widely practiced in many cultures as a means of gender selection, was now forbidden for Muslims. Women were given control over their own property, particularly their dowries, and were granted rights of inheritance, but at half the rate of their male counterparts. Marriage was considered a contract between consenting parties, thus making marriage by capture illegitimate. Divorce was possible for both parties, although it was far more readily available for men. The practice of taking multiple husbands, which operated in some pre-Islamic Arab tribes, was prohibited, while polygyny, the practice of having multiple wives, was permitted, though more clearly regulated than before. Men were limited to 4 wives and required to treat each of them equally. The difficulty of doing so has been interpreted by some as virtually requiring monogamy. Men were, however, permitted to have sexual relations with female slaves, but any children born of those unions were free, as was the mother once her owner died. Furthermore, men were strongly encouraged to marry orphans, widows, and slaves. Such Quranic prescriptions were but one factor shaping the lives of women and men. At least as important were the long-established practices of the societies into which Islam spread and the growing sophistication, prosperity, and urbanization of Islamic civilization. As had been the case in Athens and China during their golden ages, Muslim women, particularly in the upper classes, experienced growing restrictions as Islamic civilization flourished culturally and economically in the Abbasid era. In early Islamic times, a number of women played visible public roles, particularly Muhammad's youngest wife, Aisha. Women prayed in the mosques, although separately, standing beside the men. Nor were women generally veiled or secluded. As the Arab Empire grew in size and splendor, however, the position of women became more limited. The second caliph, Umar, asked women to offer prayers at home. Now veiling and the seclusion of women became standard practice among the upper and ruling classes, removing them from public life. Separate quarters within the homes of the wealthy were the domain of women, from which they could emerge only completely veiled. The Caliph Mansur carried this separation of the sexes even further when he ordered a separate bridge for women to be built over the Euphrates River in the new capital of Baghdad. Such seclusion was less possible for lower-class women who lacked the servants of the rich and had to leave the home for shopping or work. Such practices derived far more from established traditions of Middle Eastern cultures than from the Quran itself, but they soon gained an Islamic rationale in the writings of Muslim thinkers. The famous philosopher and religious scholar Al-Ghazali clearly saw a relationship between Muslim piety and the separation of the sexes. It was not permissible for a stranger to hear the sound of a pestle being pounded by a woman he does not know. If he knocks at the door, it is not proper for the woman to answer him softly and easily, because men's hearts can be drawn to women for the most trifling reason. However, if the woman has to answer the knock, she should stick her finger in her mouth so that her voice sounds like that of an old woman. Other signs of a tightening patriarchy, such as honor killing of women by their male relatives for violating sexual taboos, and in some places, clitoridectomy, female genital cutting, likewise derived from local cultures, with no sanction in the Quran or Islamic law. Where they were practiced, such customs often came to be seen as Islamic, but they were certainly not limited to the Islamic world. In many cultures, concern with family honor linked to women's sexuality dictated harsh punishments for women who violated sexual taboos. Negative views of women, presenting them variously as weak, deficient, and a sexually charged threat to men and social stability, emerged in the hadiths, traditions about the sayings or actions of Muhammad, which became an important source of Islamic law. A changing interpretation of the Adam and Eve story illustrates the point. The Quran attaches equal blame to both Adam and Eve for yielding to the temptation of Satan, and both alike ask for and receive God's forgiveness. Nothing suggests that Eve tempted or seduced Adam into sin. In later centuries, however, several hadiths and other writings took up Judeo-Christian versions of the story that blamed Eve, and thus women in general, for Adam's sin and for punishment that followed, including expulsion from the garden and pain in childbirth. Even as women faced growing restrictions in society generally, Islam, like Buddhism and Christianity, also offered new outlets for them in religious life. The Sufi practice of mystical union with Allah allowed a greater role for women than did mainstream Islam. Some Sufi orders had parallel groups for women, and a few welcomed women as equal members. Among the earliest of well-known Sufi practitioners was Rabia, an 8th century woman from Basra in southern Iraq, who renounced numerous proposals of marriage and engaged, apparently successfully, in repeated religious debates with men. The greatest of the Sufi scholars, Ibn al-Arabi, sang the praises of divine beauty in an explicitly feminine form. The spiritual equality that the Quran accorded to male and female alike allowed women also to aspire to union with God. But for some male Sufi scholars, such as the 12th century mystical poet Attar, doing so meant that she is a man and one cannot anymore call her a woman. Beyond Sufi practice, within the world of Shia Islam, women teachers of the faith were called mullahs, the same as their male counterparts. Islamic education, either in the home or in Quranic schools, allowed some to become literate and a few to achieve higher levels of learning. Visits to the tombs of major Islamic figures, as well as the ritual of the public bath, likewise provided some opportunity for women to interact with other women beyond their own family circle.